In our third panel, we will now take a closer look at the artifacts that had been seized by the Nazis. But also, we will look at the case study of an art dealer who found himself seemingly lucky to buy from the market in occupied France. Our speakers will look at efforts to return or compensate what had been looted by Nazi Germany, an endeavor that is still going on and might profit from the collaboration of many, as the last presentation will suggest. But now, let's dive straight into the subject matter with our first speaker. Please welcome Shlomit Steinberg. Shlomit Steinberg is the senior curator of European art at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem and the museum's provenance researcher. Since 2007, she's been researching and publishing catalogs and articles about restitution and provenance of Nazi-looted art, relating to the holdings of the JRSO at the Israel Museum. In 2021, she was officially appointed to the position of provenance researcher of the Israel Museum art collections. From 2014 until 2016, she was part of the International Schwabing Task Force, and in 2017, she was a member of the advisory committee on the exhibition Gurlit Status Report in Bonn. She will now present on the journey that works of art from formerly Jewish ownership took, from Neuwied to Jerusalem.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin my talk, I would like to thank the German Lost Art Foundation, Dr. Gilbert Lupfer, Ms. Kugler, for inviting me to speak in this important conference. My talk today is a work in progress because the Israel Museum, while having restituted over 35 works of art and Judaica ceremonial objects to the legitimate heirs of the Jewish owner, it is still far from concluding its due diligence, and there are paintings and drawings pending restitution as we speak. This afternoon, I will take a closer look at some of the questions that remained unsolved to this day. I will demonstrate them on several works of art that reached the Bezalel National Museum, the predecessor of the Israel Museum, during the first half of the 50s through the Jewish Agency and its branches, YERSO and the Jewish Cultural Restitution, which operated in post-war Germany and New York. The Jewish Restitution Successor Organization Incorporated, I should have learned that before, but I'll try to figure it out, was founded in 1947 in New York by 12 American and international Jewish organizations. The ESO founders, the largest Jewish organization worldwide, from the United States, Britain, France, Israel, an organization representing the interest of the Jewish congregation in the American zone of Germany, and the International Organization of World Jewish Congress. The goal of IRSO, as we call it for short, was to institute proceedings in the American occupation zone for the restitution of heirless property of murdered Jews and dissolved organizations that had been persecuted on racial grounds under the Nazi regime. The assets obtained in this manner was distributed by IRSO to Jewish institutions and organizations, primarily in the United States and the new state of Israel. Back in the 50s, the Bezalel National Museum in Jerusalem received approximately 600 works of art and about 800 Judaica artifacts. Most of them still await restitution as we speak. My research is after the detailed provenance, as can be found, for the painting under my care as the museum provenance researcher and the European art curator. The works of art which I will show you now were found on May 6, 1945, by the 44th Infantry Division of the American 7th Army, at Schloss Kugler, a stately residence in St. Georgen in Attergau, Austria. They were transported some months later to the American Central Collecting Point in Munich. And then they were photographed and researched in hope to get us some information about their previous owners. From there, they were sent to ERSO offices in Nuremberg and stored there at their depot prior to being shipped to New York or Jerusalem in early 1950. I will now show you some of these works of art in our holdings, each with a property card that was created for it at the Central Collecting Point. This is the Paul Klee. We have already restituted it, but we will discuss it today. And it's the veil dance he created in 1920. And that's its property card. Please take a look at what is written. It's going to repeat itself in the other cards as well. The next is the Alfred Sisley, a beautiful painting called The Banks of the Luing Autumn Effect from 1881, still the museum going through the last phases of restitution. And its cards. Malchior de Hundekutter, Dutch of course, 17th century, Fowl in a Barnyard. Again, the same repeated card at the back. Then André de Rennes. Now you're seeing what wonderful things we have at the museum. The Dancers. And Les Uri, that red carpet. Please note that each work of art received a card inscribed with the details about it. Some of these information was accurate, some was not, having been based on lies given by Nazi prisoners under investigation. The card stated the arrival date of the painting or drawing to Munich in March 16, 1946, and its departure from Munich on the 29th of May, 1949, on its way to the Jewish Cultural Reconstruction Depot, ERSO, in Nuremberg. A curious detail that caught my attention early on was the inscription on the back of those cards, and I showed you the same repeatedly on all of them. It read, "Confiscated from Jews at the Dutch border, evacuated by German custom authorities to Repository Neuwied on Rhine, later to Repository Kugler in Austria, from there to the Central Collecting Point in Munich." The puzzling bit was the sentence, "confiscated from Jews at the Dutch border." The image that came to my mind was a family of German Jews trying to escape in their private car from their home in Germany to the Netherlands and being stopped at a border checkpoint by the officials of the Third Reich custom authorities. Logically, this might have taken place during the second half of the 30s, before Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg were annexed to the Third Reich territories in 1940. Were these people trying to cross the border with all those personal belongings, including household goods, among them paintings, framed paintings? Where did this strange information came from? In order to illustrate what the text said, I done something I never believed I would. I asked the artificial intelligence, Gemini, to draw me a picture of what I had in mind, and was amazed by the accurate result. But still, just take a look. This is the statistics of the Jews who ran away from Germany to other countries before 1940. And this is what Gemini did for me. Okay, it does look a little like Hergé, but I did say the Luxembourg. But still, something did not make sense. The small selection of paintings and drawings I showed you here, among many more in Jerusalem, were not confiscated at the border, not the Dutch border, not any other border. And so the information on their property card was false. A way to find out more and get to the bottom of this misleading piece of information was to go back to the Harry Fuld Jr. case. Here was the restitution. At the museum, we were proud of accomplishing some years back. Maybe this could be a starting point for some answers and clues pertaining to the other works in our holdings. In 2010, the drawing of Veil Dance, created by Paul Klee in 1920, was returned to Harry Fuld Jr. legitimate heirs, the charitable Jewish organization Magen David Adom United Kingdom, who received several more of the Fuld's lost artifacts as time went by. Harry Fuld Jr. was the older son of Harry Fuld Sr., a successful German businessman. The Fulds came from a family of antique dealers. Harry Sr.'s uncle, Julius Goldsmith, and his father, Sally Fuld, were co-owners of the renowned Frankfurt antique and art dealers J&S Goldsmith, founded in the middle of the 19th century and later having branches in Berlin, Paris, and New York. Fuld Sr. founded his private telephone company and the business expanded rapidly. He was also a patron of the Städel Museum, collecting modern art with the help of Georg Schwarzinski, the director of the Städel Museum, we've already seen that today, in Frankfurt. Harry Sr. died in Zurich in 1932 during a business trip. His son, Junior, worked in Vienna and fled to Switzerland in 1937, and later on, in 1939, to England. Before leaving Germany for good, he stored some of the art collection he inherited, including Klee Veil Dance, at the Gustav Knauer Storage and Shipping Company in Berlin. No Dutch border. In 1941, under the 11th decree of the Reich Citizenship Law of November 25th, a period that coincided with the deportation of German Jews, all assets of German Jews in Germany and abroad became forfeit to the Reich once they lost their citizenship. Thus, stored crafts and lifts held in various storage facilities in Germany and in the annexed countries, containing painting, drawing, porcelainware, and various other artifacts, were taken away, brought to a sorting facility within Germany, opened, and selections were made for the destinations of their contents. Although the inscription on the back of the Veil Dance card says so, the fact is that Harry Fuld Jr. was never stopped at the German-Dutch border with this drawing or any other artifact in his possession because he never crossed the border. And more to the point, the drawing was already stored in Knauers in Berlin since 1937, until its confiscation with the rest of the Fuld's possessions in 1942 under the above-mentioned 11th decree. More than 80 artifacts from Fuld's collection were processed by experts working for the Nazi authorities and taken to be auctioned off at the Hans Lange auction house in Berlin in the sale that took place in January 27, 28, and 29, 1943. Veil Dance, along with a painting by Matisse and works by André Derain and Oskar Kokoschka, were not part of this Lange auction because they were considered to be degenerate art. Instead, they were transferred to the Reichsleiter-Rosenberg Task Force, the ERR as we call them, with the aim to sell them outside Germany for foreign currency or use them for exchanges. It was thus moved to an ERR custom depot in the industrial city of Neuwied, on the River Rhine and stored there as part of the organization holdings accumulated from works of art confiscated after 1941 from storage companies which held greater Jewish household goods and art since the mid-30s. As already mentioned, the drawing was later transported in 1944 to Schloss Kugler in Austria, where it was discovered together with other confiscated Jewish possessions. A large oil painting, Banks of Louis, Autumn Effect, was created in 1881 by the important Impressionist painter Alfred Sisley. It had a marvelous provenance from the artist's studio on, sold by the gallerist Paul Durand-Ruel in 1907 to the Budapest National Museum of Fine Art. It was de-accessed in 1916 through an exchange against a painting by Manet with the dealer Walter Kurt Bachstitz. And from him, it moved to the best art dealers of Germany until it was bought by a Jewish matron. This family, whose name I cannot divulge as they are in the middle of restitution case, which is currently being processed at the Israel Museum, they escaped Germany in 1938. Prior to their escape, they packed and shipped their entire household goods, mostly furniture, but very few works of art, among them the Sisley, to the facility of the Belgic-German company Le Continental Menkes in Antwerp. Le Continental Menkes, just so you know, is a daughter company of Schenker. We use them today. In August 1946, Le Continental Menkes informed the family that their crates were confiscated by Feldkommandatur 520 on October 9th, 1942, and transported back to Germany. So once again, this was not a case of confiscation of a painting at the Dutch border. The family did not cross the Dutch border, and their goods were usurped along with others and brought when they were already in a safe place in Europe, the family. Another similarity between clay drawing you saw and the Sicily painting here, that both works of art found their way to the already mentioned custom depot in Neuwied, and like Clay's veil dance, the Sicily was transported to Schloss Kugel, Austria, while the clay drawing was restituted to Harry Full Jr. legitimate heirs. And the Sicily awaits an amicable solution between the Israel Museum and its legitimate heirs. A third painting that bears similar provenance characteristic is the Fall in a Barnyard, typical of the 17th century Dutch master Melchior de Hundekutter workshop. The painting was in 1933 in an auction at the Jewish gallerist and auctioneer Hugo Helbings. This has an American Army property card with the same dubious inscription. This genre painting also had prestigious provenance even before it reached the successful gallerist and auctioneer in Munich, and prior to being taken over by Nazi hand. Born in Munich in 1863, Hugo Helbing founded the Kunsthandlung Hugo Helbing in his native city of Munich. From 1906, Helbing ran the company together with other co-owners, which later on included his son Fritz. The international renowned house had branches in Berlin and Frankfurt, and Helbing was bestowed the honorary title for a businessman, Kommerzeirat. Helbing's auctions were considered social events, and between 1930 and 1935, the auction house hosted 123 auctions, making it one of the largest auction houses of its time. In 1935, Helbing's membership in the Reichskamera der Bildenden Kunst was revoked, and with it, its auction license expired. From then on, he had to have his business run by an ionized employee. On 9th November 1938, the Helbing Art Shop was closed and Max Hayes, an employee of the Third Reich Chamber of Fine Art, was appointed as trustee. Helbing himself was beaten up that day during the Kristallnacht pogrom. On the 30th of November 1938, he died from his severe injuries. The organization process failed because Hayes was not granted an auctioning license, and the gallery was then sold in 1941 to the art dealer Jacob Schweidwemer, who continued to run the business as an art gallery where he sold art objects. According to the information concerning the March 33 sale, Helbing sold the farmyard to a Mr. Richard Leitner. Richard Leitner was a Jewish art dealer, a renowned consultant on Asiatic porcelain. He was born in Vienna in 1874 and escaped Europe via Genoa in 1939, moving to New York, where he eventually died in 1953. Obviously, the Hundertkötter painting was not with him when he left for the United States, nor did he pass through the Dutch border. As the painting was moved from Helbing's to the Lange auction house for the 1941 auction, we might assume that it was left by Leitner at Helbing's with instruction for the auctioneer to sell it for him. We don't know. In 1941, the painting appeared at the Lange auction of March 12. Leitner's name was not part of the stated provenance, while Helbing's auction house is. So how did the painting end up like the two former shows, the ones I showed you, with the same inscription about its confiscation at the border between Germany and the Netherlands? When I cross-referenced the post-41 provenance details of the paintings and drawings I showed you, and many others in our holdings, I noted that all of them reached the custom depot in Neuwied between 42 and 43, and in 44 they were moved most likely in order to protect them from the Allied forces' bombs to Schloss Kugler in Austria, not far from Linz. The numbers of items moved were around 300 and included some furniture as well. When the American army reached Schloss Kugel, they found some 700 works of art, furniture and books stored there, together with ERR executive Dr. Robert Scholz and members of his immediate family. Dr. Scholz might be the key to an understanding more about the Neuwied-Kugel art transfers. Scholz, a familiar name to many of you, was Alfred Rosenberg's right-hand man in charge, albeit mostly from his office in Berlin, of the looting of Jewish art collection in Paris and sending them to storage facilities in Germany, such as the Neuwied Depot. This is the Lange auction, and very star-like quality, I must say. When the war was coming to a close on both fronts, there was a calculated maneuver to keep him with a cachet of artworks for future exchange for currency. During his repeated interrogation by the Americans, he concocted the false story that those were works of art confiscated in the late 30s from Jews crossing the border. It was his idea of giving them provenance. He even went as far as tell this lie to his investigator when testifying about paintings that were looted as part of the Mobile Action Builder operation in the south of France as late as June 44, as this drawing by André Deren in the Israel Museum demonstrate. And you can see how it says so, that it was his statement on the cards. It was Scholz's statement that created this false information, distracted provenance researchers from the right path. Having come up with dead end while looking for the identities of the true owners of those works of art, Now, we at the Israel Museum may be able to find more about them and return their possession to their rightful heirs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, dear Shlomit, for this detailed insight. I take from it that you are very busy at the museum. Do we have any questions or comments on this talk now? I don't see any hands raised.
So move to the next.
We're going to move on to the next speaker and postpone any potential questions to the next pause. I may now introduce Gitta Ho, who has been working as provenance researcher at the Mission de Recherche et de Restitutions des biens culturels spoliés entre 1933 et 1945 at the Ministry of Culture in Paris. She has previously worked as provenance researcher for the Museum of Fine Arts in Bern, Switzerland, and here particularly on the Cornelius Gorlet legacy. Other steps in her career included working as provenance researcher in Neuchâtel, for the INHA in Paris, and for the Technical University of Berlin. She has also been lecturer in provenance research at the University Paris-Nanterre, as well as at the École du Louvre in Paris. I'm very happy that you even found the time to be here today. Your presentation bears the captivating title, A Question of Point of View, on the post-1945 handling of Wolfgang Krüger's art acquisitions in occupied France, and I'm very excited to hear about it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fine. Thank you very much for having me here. Still today, France commemorates the 8th of May 1945 each year. In Paris, as in many other European cities, people spontaneously took to the streets on the day World War II ended to celebrate this historic moment. Crowds gathered in various locations across the city, including the square in front of the Jeu de Paume that we see in this photograph. Similar scenes had already taken place in Paris 9 months earlier. In August 1944, citizens of the French capital gathered in the streets to cheer the liberation from German occupation. The area in front of Notre Dame was filled with jubilant crowds celebrating the end of 4 years of oppression. The liberation also marked the end of the systematic persecution of Jews in Paris, in France. A key player in this persecution had been the Commissariat Général aux Questions Juives, an office established during the occupation. Operating from its Paris headquarters, the Commissariat implemented anti-Jewish measures and oversaw the spoliations of major Jewish art collections, including those of the Rothschilds and Wildenstein families. Many of these looted artworks were transported eastward, with Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria serving as the primary storage site for assets taken from France. After the war, the artworks stored at Neuschwanstein were gradually returned to France. Beginning in October 1945, shipments of recovered objects made their way back to Paris. However, the castle's remote mountaintop location and the hard winter conditions posed significant logistical challenges for the transport operations. In some cases, artworks were transported directly from their storage locations to France, while in others they passed through multiple stages within Germany, namely the central collecting points, established by the Western Allies from 1945 onward, as most of you know. These centers were set up across various occupation zones, with the largest located in the American zone. The significance of French collections during World War II is evident in the fact that by 1947, nearly 2/3 of all works processed at the most important collecting point, the one in Munich, came from France. In the British occupation zone, artworks were mainly stored in Celle, while the collecting point for the French zone was located in Baden-Baden. The officials responsible for the repatriation of artworks across the different occupation zones began collaborating early on. One key figure in this effort was the French curator Rose Valland, we saw her earlier, who had secretly documented looted artworks at the Jeu de Paume during the occupation. After the war, she was sent to Germany to oversee the return of these works to France, working not only within the French zone, but also across other occupation zones. This cooperation between the Allies raises several questions that will guide my presentation. These are: how effectively did Allied cooperation and art repatriation functions after 1945? Where did disagreements arise and where were the synergies? How did they deal with the difficulties that arose shortly after the war in transporting artworks from the various occupation zones to their countries of origin? This topic will be analyzed during a case study, namely an art collection whose whereabouts were discussed in no less than 3 different occupation zones after the war, the art collection of Wolfgang Krüger. Firstly, a few words about the collector, who is little known today. Krüger was a publisher based first in Berlin and later in Hamburg. After studying literature and art history, he spent several years at sea as a naval officer before turning to publishing. In 1934, he founded Krüger Verlag in Berlin, which still exists today, but has since then become part of Fischer Verlag. Krüger was not Jewish and only came to the attention of the central collecting points because these institutions were not exclusively a center for looted art. The central collecting points also stored works purchased by Germans in occupied countries like France during the war. Due to the artificially favorable exchange rates imposed by the Germans during the occupation, German buyers benefited significantly on the French art market. Additionally, there were suspicions that some of these works had originally belonged to looted Jewish collections. For these, but also for other reasons, artworks legally acquired in France during the war were seized from their owners after 1945 and transported back to Paris. They were handed over to the French state. Little is known about Wolfgang Krüger's art collection. However, archival documents provide insight into the purchase he made in France during World War II. The list displayed here provides details about these works acquired by Krüger in Paris from 1941 onward during the German occupation. The names Renoir, Sisley, Pissarro, Degas appear frequently, indicating that Krüger focused on renowned 19th century French artists when buying works in Paris. He also recorded the French art dealers from whom he made these acquisitions, including well-known figures like Durand-Ruel, as well as lesser-known dealers such as Jacques Dubourg and Henri Bénézit. The record includes dimensions, prices, purchase dates, offering a detailed picture on the transactions. It should be noted that Krüger's collection was not stored in a single location, but spread across different sites: Hamburg, Ahrensburg in Schleswig-Holstein, and Vienna. While the first 2 locations fell within the British occupation zone, artworks in Vienna were under the responsibility of the American collecting point in Munich, which handled their return. Photographs were also taken of the artworks Krüger purchased in Paris, which today helps to identify these paintings and drawings. Along with acquisition lists, these images provide a comprehensive record of the collection's French works. For a foreign collector, the number of works Krüger acquired in Paris during World War II was remarkably high. 17 photographs were handed over to the military government. However, later research revealed that not all of these his purchases were documented, meaning the true number of works he acquired in France was even larger. The decision to photograph the artworks was directly related to the aforementioned post-war decree requiring German private collectors to surrender any work they had purchased in occupied territories, such as among such as France, to the Allied forces. As one can imagine, this regulation met with little understanding among German collectors, particularly those who had acquired works on the regular Parisian art market, as Krüger had. The German art historian Ordenberg Bock von Wülfingen, who had been working at the Munich collecting point since 1945, summarized the experience of applying the regulation in a lecture at the time, in which he said, "The decision that every purchase of a work of art in territories occupied by Germany, even when there was no duress, should be deemed invalid, has without doubt caused hardship in numerous individual cases, because this decision did not only affect purchases for Hitler and Göring, it also affects private collectors and state museums, which may have had to sell property on their own in order to finance such a purchase." Wolfgang Krüger was no exception. Like many other collectors, he was reluctant to hand over the artworks he had recently acquired. The British military government informed him that the paintings and drawings he had purchased in France during the war, stored in Schleswig-Holstein and Hamburg, had to be prepared for transport back to France. Krüger immediately contested this order in lengthy letters shown here. He strongly opposed handing over the works, addressing his objections to British officials responsible for reparations. He argued first that as a publisher, he had faced difficulties with the National Socialists due to this internationally focused Francophile book publications and had no ties to the Nazi regime. Secondly, he insisted that his accusations had been legitimate, purchased from French art dealers operating freely and not acting under duress, which means that the acquisitions were regular transactions. The British officials forwarded Krüger's letters to their French colleagues, but did not hesitate to add their own commentary on the case. We see here the document in which a British monument man, Johann Phillips, pointed out that Krüger was a renowned publisher who wanted nothing to do with the National Socialists. Against the background of Krüger's Francophile attitude, the British official was of the opinion that France should drop the claim and should refrain from insisting on the return of the works. I quote, "It is the opinion of the undersigned, put forward with all due deference, that the French authorities might consider whether or not it is, in the long run, in the best interest of France to press their claims in this rather unusual case." End of quote. Further letters followed from the British side expressing the view that the French could only claim Krüger's artworks if there were reasonable suspicion that they had been looted. The British therefore requested that the French provide evidence proving the works in Krüger's possession had been unlawfully acquired. The correspondence marked mixed reactions among the French authorities, dividing opinion into different camps. Some supported Phillips' view, arguing that Krüger should be granted an exception due to his pro-French publishing activities and that the artworks he had purchased in France should not be reclaimed. A key voice in this debate was French publisher and author Jean Schlumberger, co-founder of the renowned literary journal Nouvelle Revue Française, alongside André Gide. Having had several of his books published by Krüger, Schlumberger personally wrote to the French Foreign Ministry to support him, stating, I quote, "The confiscation with which he, Mr. Krüger, is threatened would affect not only his interests but also his attachment to the cause of the French state. It would be extremely harsh on a man who had always been actively anti-Nazi and would have had a deplorable effect in Francophile circles where Mr. Krüger is much listened to. Nothing could be more discouragingly counteract the efforts we are making to conciliate the intellectual elite of Germany." End of quote. Others, however, strongly opposed granting Krüger an exemption from returning the artworks to Paris, fearing it would set a precedent. Among those firmly advocating for their restitution to France was Albert Henrault, director of the Commission de récupération artistique, the French organization responsible for post-war art restitutions. In a letter addressing the Krüger case, he expressed his point of view. I quote, "We estimate that all purchases made during the occupation were cancelled by the London Declaration of 1942. In addition, all the Allies accepted the restitution of works of art purchased as well as stolen objects, as purchases made during the occupation could not be considered as normal commercial transactions due to the exchange rate and the general conditions of the occupation. It is essential that there should be no misunderstanding on this subject, and we must maintain in the firmest terms of our point of view accepted by all the Allied countries, including England." End of quote. Henrault thus emphasizes the need for all allies to stick to rules that they have been agreed upon. He appears to be referring specifically to the London Inter-Allied Declaration against acts of dispossession committed in territories under enemy occupation or control, which became the foundation of Allied restitution policy from 1943 onward. This declaration granted the Allies the authority to nullify any transfer or sale of property that took place in territories occupied or controlled by enemy states. Even if the transactions were carried out without any duress, they were considered invalid. Before the French authorities could reconcile the differing opinions on the Krüger case, the American military government stepped in. As previously mentioned, some of Krüger's artworks were stored in Vienna, a region where external restitutions fell under the jurisdiction of the American zone. To proceed with the case, US authorities requested confirmation that these works were not looted art. The French Commission de récupération artistique, CRA, soon began investigating not only Krüger's works in Vienna, but all the works purchased by the German collector in France to trace their potential Jewish owners. This process involved sending inquiries to the dealers regarding the provenance of the paintings sold to Krüger. Not all works yielded responses regarding previous ownership, but for 7 of Krüger's works, clarification was possible. Several of them were identified as having come from Jewish ownership. Renoir's fish painting previously belonged to Mr. El Kaim, owner of the Galerie Montparnasse in Paris, who was deported without return in 1943. Renoir's mills were part of the collection of the Jewish art dealer Grégoire Schustermann, who sold his works before and during fleeing to the Zone Libre in the south of France in 1941. The dancer by Guy originated from the 1942 auction of the Jewish Dorville collection. The Pissarro work was sold in Paris in 1942 by the Jewish collector Max Braunthal, originally from Germany. The results of the investigations strengthened Henrault, the director of the CRA, in his decision to oppose allowing Krüger an exception to keep the works purchased in France. However, since many voices had already supported renouncing the restitution of the works to France, and this information had been prematurely communicated to Krüger, it was decided that under these circumstances, a complete reversal was not longer possible. Already at an earlier stage, the idea of reaching an amicable settlement with Krüger and finding a compromise together had been discussed. The archives we know do not tell us what kind of compromise this could be. However, it appears that the place of storage of the works purchased by Krüger was decisive in determining which ones were returned to France and which stayed in Germany. The 4 works, which we see here in color, that Krüger had stored with friends and colleagues in Schleswig-Holstein and Vienna, were subsequently restituted to France. These artworks still are in France today and have become part of the so-called MNR, Musées Nationaux Récupération works, which were handed over to the French museums for safekeeping after the war without becoming a regular part of the state collections. Other works, however, have completely disappeared. Among them is the fish painting by Renoir, for which post-war investigations determined that its former Jewish owner was deported in 1943 with no further trace of him since. Apparently, Krüger was not required to restitute this work to France, but was instead allowed to keep it, a decision that is highly perplexing today. Other works from Jewish ownership, those of Max Braunthal, Armand d'Orville, and Grégoire Schustermann, also seemingly remained in Krüger's possession and later dispersed in various directions. The Pissarro painting from Max Braunthal's collection is now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The work from Armand d'Orville was put up for sale on the art market in 2009. The whereabouts of the Renoir painting, once owned by Grégoire Schustermann, remain unknown. To conclude, the Krüger case demonstrates that cooperation between the different occupation zones in the field of art restitution after the war was fraught with potential for conflict. Misunderstandings, poorly functioning communication, competing interests, and disregarding the decisions of others led to a situation that could have been avoided by adhering to existing international regulations which were already in place at the time and applied to all Allied forces. Although it's difficult to assess without systematic research into other complex restitution cases after 1945 that involved multiple allies, the Krüger case makes clear that in the end it is the descendants of former Jewish owners who suffer the consequences. Since some of the paintings seem to have remained in Krüger's possession after the war and were later sold by him or his family, the number of artworks that spread across the global art market increased. As a result, these works are nowadays often difficult to locate, and when restitution claims arise, and further research has to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fascinating indeed. This particular case of Wolfgang Krüger had been completely new to me. What about the audience? Do we have questions and comments now? I don't see anyone, so I think we just leave it like that. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Darleen Pappelau. She studied history and art history at the universities of Stuttgart and Würzburg and completed her master's degree in collections, provenance and cultural heritage at the University of Würzburg. Her thesis was titled The Mittelstandsnothilfe, the Middle Class Aid, as object supplier for the Stadtpalais and the Linden Museum in Stuttgart between 1933 and 1945, which she completed in 2021. She has been working at Stadtpalais Stuttgart between 2020 and 2022, after which she became trainee at Staatliche Schlösser und Gärten Hessen, where she focused on collection history and provenance research. Since May 2023, she has been working as provenance researcher at the University Library Johann Christian Senckenberg in Frankfurt. She is currently involved in a project that researches Nazi-looted cultural property and valuable special collections of this library that were published between 1501 and 1945. She will now present on restitutions of the Offenbach archival depot and its remainders.
Thanks for your kind introduction, Fine, and for the invitation to give a talk on the restitutions of the Offenbach archival depot and its remainders. First, some basic information. The Offenbach archival depot was established in September 1945 at the Rothschild Palais in Frankfurt, initially the site of the Rothschild Library. Nowadays, you'll find there the Jewish Museum. Due to space constraints, it was relocated in December 1945 to the former IG Farben Industrial Building in Offenbach. Since the 1st of May 1946, it was the sole collecting point of the American Zone for books, archival materials, manuscripts, and ritual objects. The archival depot was closed in June 1949. Over the years, different methods for identifying objects were used. At first, states were called on to each name a restitution officer to identify objects of the state's origin on their own. 15 states named someone to work on its subject directly at the depot in Offenbach. This meant, firstly, the objects were sorted after the state of origin and restituted to said state with the task to restitute further. In April 1946, a new identifying process was introduced. Pictures were taken of the provenance traits and put on lists, again sorted after countries. Traits of over 4,000 people and institutions were found in 35 languages. 2/3 of them appear to be Jewish. The workers at Offenbach used these lists to identify the traits and their origin. The lists were needed as not everyone was speaking various languages and could identify them. As you may see in the corner, we still encounter a lot of different languages, for example, Latvian, Dutch, Ukrainian, or Slovenian. The first restitutions took place in late March 1946. Till late April, 1 million books were restituted. Overall, approximately 3.5 million objects were restituted through the Offenbach archival depot. Till its closing in June 1949, nearly 5 million books of more than 4,000 different public and private libraries were processed through the depot. Just to name some of the restitutions that took place. In April 1946, 70,000 books were returned to the Prussian State Library. Between April 1946 and July 1947, many books were transferred back to France, in total 320,000 objects. In June 1947, 80,000 objects were restituted to the Jaivo in New York, including objects of Jaivo Vilna and other provenances from Vilna. German unions got 60,000 books back in October 1948. And further, the JCR got many different restitutions over time. Since 1949, 150,000 objects with unidentifiable origin were distributed through JCR, as well as 900 Jehovah's Scrolls, 250,000 Judaica and Hebraica, and 30,000 books of the so-called Baltic collection. Also, 8,000 ritual objects were distributed through JCR to Israel, USA, Great Britain, South Africa, Canada, Argentina, Peru, and Western Europe. Another restitution at the end of the depot was to the representing of Jewish communities in Germany with 10,000 books. In preparation of closing the archival depot, objects left were sent since September 1948 to the collecting point in Wiesbaden. 45,000 books out of the former property of Jewish individuals were sent there. It was decided JCR would search for former owners of at least 6 books. This affected 16,500 books in total. These were transferred to the depots of Joint. Subsequently, 5,000 books were restituted. The other ones were split between Israel and the United States. On 15 February 1949, Jewish objects left at the archival depot were given to JCR. The JCR searched for their heirs till 1952. Then they splitted these as well between Israel, the United States, Canada, Western Europe, and some other states. The collecting point in Wiesbaden was closed on the 1st of July 1951, Everything left was sent to the central collecting point Munich, left Jewish objects to JRSO Nuremberg. In August 1948, the military government gave trusteeship of 286,610 books to the Hesse Prime Minister, which were thought were obviously of German origin, mostly of German individuals or German public institutions. The assignment was to find the rightful owners and restitute. If there was no one to find, they could distribute the books elsewhere. In the same month, the Hessian Prime Minister gave these books into trusteeship of the University of Frankfurt. In summer 1950, 100,000 books of the Archival depot were given to the Hesse state government as well. It was thought there would be no Jewish provenances. In reality, many books were from Jewish private libraries. Some of them, mostly Jewish literature, was given to the JCR. The rest was spread over Hesse libraries, mostly Frankfurt, but also elsewhere. In 1953, 20 crates were restituted from the city and university library to the umbrella organization of German unions. So, how many do we still have today? The short answer is, we don't know. But why? After they got to the city and university library, they were processed in mainly two different ways. Firstly, they got spread out all over Hesse to different libraries. To this day, we can't really reconstruct how many exactly went that way. Secondly, they got spread around our library and are now to find in various different shelf marks. One example was part of our first project, the shelf mark group 00. But although we checked every book in autopsy, we can't even tell how many Offenbach Archival Depot books are in this shelf mark. As we had roughly 79,000 books to check, we only worked on those with provenance marks. But there are many books from the Archival Depot without any traits, not even the stamp of the Archival Depot, which you can see here. The origin is only identifiable through our own accession numbers. We found 73 accession numbers between 1948 and 1959, which state the Archival Depot as origin of the books. Combined, they contain 19,892 books. So why can't we just go through all the accession books and search for Donum O, as the Archival Depot is mostly named? Although it is mostly named, sometimes accessions from the depot are under old inventory. How many did we find in our first project? We found 5,143 books, which came through the Offenbach Archival Depot. Most of them are unspecific, meaning they mostly only have the Archival Depot stamp and nothing further. A little part of the 5,000 is definitely not looted. These are mostly Nazi literature, published in the late 30s or early 40s. A larger part of 475 books is most definitely looted. That's 9%. We already restituted 59 of them. The others are work in progress. In another perspective, till today, we restituted 82 books to 30 heirs, of which 59 came through the Archival Depot, of whom I want to give some examples to show the variety of cases, circumstances, and former owners. First, the Grand Lodge of Druidism, Bavaria. The Grand Lodge of Druidism in Bavaria was founded on February 2nd, 1878. Like many other lodge organizations, the Druids were persecuted by the National Socialists and ultimately banned. In 1935, following a series of repressions, boycotts, and confiscations, the Druid Order disbanded itself. On February 8, 1935, the premises of the Grand Lodge in Bavaria were searched and the inventory was confiscated. Despite a formal complaint, the confiscated libraries, archives, and ritual objects were never returned. After the end of World War II, the Grand Lodge of Druids was re-established in August 1948. In the same year, one book of the Druids came to us through the Offenbach Archival Depot. It was restituted at the end of the last year. Second, the Central Library of Unions, Hanover. The Central Library was founded in 1910 and set up in the newly opened Union Center. The basic stock comprised 6,000 volumes and grew to 17,000 by 1926. On April 1st, 1933, the Union Building was the first in Germany to be confiscated, along with its inventory, and was later handed to the German Labor Front. The library was subsequently cleaned and restocked. It continued to operate as a lending center for the German Labor Front in Hanover until the beginning of 1935 at the latest, when it was largely, or even completely, handed over to the main archives of the National Socialist Party in Munich. In 1947, the former managing director of the Union Center applied for the library to be transferred back or replaced. 3 years later, one book was catalogued, which came through the archival depot. We restituted this book of the Central Library alongside 43 other books to the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in September 2024. And last, August Liebmann-Meyer. Born in 1885, August Liebmann-Meyer became an art historian and expert for Spanish painting. Meyer was already slandered and persecuted for anti-Semitic reasons during the Weimar period. Due to the campaign against him, he terminated his employment in 1931. He was imprisoned in March 1933, his house got confiscated, and he was released in July 1933. A few years later, he emigrated to Paris. After the declaration of war against Germany, he got imprisoned by France. After his release, parts of France were already occupied, which is why he couldn't get back to his family in Paris. Instead, he stayed in unoccupied regions. In 1941, his apartment in Paris was ransacked and his paintings and library were subsequently looted. In February 1944, the Gestapo was made aware of his whereabouts and Meyer got deported to Auschwitz, where he was murdered, presumably on March 12. His library was transferred to Castle Kugler, where it was found by the Americans in 1947. After the war, his daughter fought for restitution, which was granted for some belongings only in 1963. His library remained lost. The denunciation also continued to have an effect, and Meyer's work was still not recognized at the end of the 1980s. In 2008, his fate finally became known through new research. Since 2010, his daughter released several restitutions, including one book from us in spring 2024. In regards of finding everything we got through the archival depot, where do we stand? Many Offenbach archival depot objects are not stamped, neither with the archival depot stamp nor any other provenance. This said, we probably already saw double what we found, but the found accession numbers indicate we should be able to find at least 20,000 books. However, the true number could be way higher. Taking into account how many were transferred to us, it should be somewhere between 20,000 and 300,000. We probably never know an exact number, but as we know how many of the found ones are looted, we give our best to find as many as possible to restitute them to the heirs of their former owners. If you are interested in our findings and in our progress, you can explore our online catalog as we try to show the critical provenance traits we find as transparently as possible. Just look for Archival Depot under Provenance in our advanced search, as you can see here, or for any other name you may be searching for. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your contribution, and I see a hand is raised.
I have a question connected not so much to restitutions from Offenbach depot, but to problematic stories connected with Offenbach depot. I'm talking about theft of rare manuscripts and communal records by Gershom Scholem, which became kind of complicated case for American administration and for the Department of State. All these manuscripts stolen by Scholem were deposited by him by the library of the Hebrew University. And I wanted to ask you to which extent during your research you dealt with this interesting issue.
You are asking about archival materials that were in Offenbach?
Yeah, it's not only it's manuscripts and communal records, mainly of Lithuanian and Italian provenance. Gerhard Scholem believed, I think, that it's best place for these records is Israel and these manuscripts, and basically stole them, which created a difficult situation for the US Department of State, which in the end of the day decided not to proceed with demands of return of these manuscripts, not to put Americans in a idiotic situation. Did you see something on this? Because we have quite a profound
I must say, I probably can't answer your question, because we're more concentrated on the things we have and the connection to Offenbach, and not so much on things that go other ways. So I'm probably not the right person to ask, and I'm sorry.
Thank you.
We've got another question here. Oh, and another one there.
Anna Horter-Kawałko of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So I will be happy to answer your question about those manuscripts, because actually I know a great deal about them. They were indeed transferred very early in 1946 to Jerusalem. And then when this issue came to the public by Stars and Stripes, it was an article published about them. So it was already at the point when the manuscripts were transferred to Mount Scopus, to the Hebrew University campus. And then in 1948, the war broke out. The campus became an enclave, and it was also physically impossible to get those manuscripts, because Jordanian did not agree for the Hebrew University to get up on the hill and to access it. But of course, it was, on the other hand, very convenient for the university. The access to the campus was returned only in the end of the 50s. So the manuscripts remained in Jerusalem in the sense. But I have another question. I wanted to ask you about other instances of theft or unusual practices at Offenbach, but this might not be the right question for you. So I would like to ask you about the broader significance of your project. Like, do you document what also happens to the book after the restitution? Do you is there any way of seeing the books that you already restituted, or you will be hopefully restituting in the future, to keep this story alive, not to end it with the restitution, especially if your aim is to put them back into private hands? And then I know there is a kind of feeling of doing justice within, but from the perspective of researchers interested in having this story about the Offenbach and the transition to your library, for instance, it's also very important to me to have those stories visible after the restitution is done. So I'm curious how you see it, not to have this books disappears and those stories disappeared afterwards, or is there any kind of thinking involved in your project in this direction as well? Thanks.
Actually, it is, because we also thought that is something we want to share and want to document. The books we restitute, they stay in our online catalog. We don't cancel them, and we make a notice with restitution, and also to whom and when So if you just the search I showed before, the advanced search, if you put restitution in the provenance field, you see all the books re-restituted already. Yeah, it was important to us.
The next question, please.
Thank you for a report. My name is Olaf Hamann, and I'm from the hosting Staatsbibliothek zu Berlin. For me, it was very interesting to learn new details according the evacuation of our collections, because I didn't know that 70,000 books from the Offenbach archival depot were given to the Prussian State Library. Can you tell us some more details about how did the books come to the Offenbach depot? And probably, I suppose, they were given to the Marburg collection, not to Berlin.
If I remember correctly, they were one of the cases where they were just in the boxes with the etiquette on it, like we know it from Amsterdam and something like that, and were just put back like that, like they were in the crates. But I don't have any more details.
Any additions to that? To something else, a brand new question.
Yeah, sorry, I have a new question. Thank you for your report. When you reported on the accessions in your acquisition journals, there was a rapid big drop-off after 1951 of books that were coming from OAD. I kind of notice this kind of practice from our own accession journals, but do you have an explanation why was there a change in personnel? Was there a change in description? Did they just label them something else?
I think it's just that the books from the archival depot came mostly in 1948 and until 1951, and I just think that they were some leftovers that we catalogued in 1900. What was it, 59, other way around. So they just needed some time to catalog all these thousands of books. And I think that's the only reason that it was so late. It was actually the accession number in 1959. That's a book series of 7 books, and that's all. I think they just were somewhere in the library. They found it and were like, "Oh, yeah, we need to catalog it." It's just easy as that, probably.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. We are now coming to the last presentation for today, which is a very dazzling one. Bettina Farack will present the Library of Lost Books as an online citizen science project. Bettina Farack has been project coordinator for the Library of Lost Books at Freunde und Förderer des Leo Baeck Institutes Berlin, so friends and supporters of the Leo Baeck Institute, since 2023. She has also been working as consultant of the German-Israeli Textbook Commission in Jerusalem and is researcher at the Simon Dubnow Institute Leipzig. Prior to this, she was head of collections at the Leo Baeck Institute in Jerusalem. Please come to the stage. We are very keen on seeing your presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Fine. It's great to be here and have the opportunity to speak. Dear colleagues, this panel looks at how looted cultural property was addressed after 1945, especially in cases where return and compensation were possible. But not all items could be returned. Many books remained unclaimed, either because their owners had been murdered or because no heirs could be identified. Some were left where the war had scattered them. Others were redistributed and integrated into new library collections. Over time, their origins were forgotten, and today many of these books remain in use without recognition of their history. The challenge is not only to trace these books, but to consider how we acknowledge them when legal restitution is not an option. My talk today explores an alternative approach, one that does not rely on legal restitution, but instead invites the public to take part in provenance research and recognition efforts. One way we do this is through search days, that is, workshops where we invite students and volunteers to examine library collections and look for looted books. They learn how to recognize provenance marks and compare their findings with historical records. During one of these search days in London, something unexpected happened. The workshop was supposed to wrap up, but the students refused to stop searching. They were completely absorbed in tracing ownership marks and identifying books. That moment made one thing clear. When given the right tools, people don't just want to hear about provenance research. They want to take part in it and contribute in meaningful ways. That is why we launched the Library of Lost Books, to make provenance research participatory. Instead of talking about lost books, we are inviting people to help find them. Let's have a look at the project. Film ab, bitte.
Recovering treasures while standing up to the Nazis, all in your spare time. Does that sound like a hobby for you? Congrats, and please note, you don't need a fancy hat and you can leave the machete at home. The only thing required is a razor-sharp mind and maybe a weakness for beautiful books. That's right, books. That's what the Nazis were after. From 1938 onwards, they systematically looted Jewish libraries, both public and private. It's hard to believe, but true, that they did this to set up their own library. Of course, only they were allowed to use this source material for their so-called research. The findings were unsurprising. In other words, thoroughly anti-Semitic. But as you will recall, they lost the war, and the looted books were scattered all over the world. Despite extensive search efforts, not all of them have yet been found. And that's where you come in. Together, we'll go on a hunt for books from the Higher Institute for Jewish Studies in Berlin. And we aim to find as many as possible. We'll provide you with everything you need to start searching for lost treasures in your neighborhood. Follow the leads, keep an eye out for clues, and share your findings with us. What are you waiting for? Let's write history. Together, we'll fill the library of lost books.
Thanks a lot. As you have just seen, the Library of Lost Books is not a typical provenance research project. It takes a different approach, one that extends provenance research beyond institutions and invites broader participation. Most provenance research begins with an object and traces its history backward to find the original owner. We do the opposite. We know the owner, the Hochschule für die Wissenschaft des Judentums. Instead of waiting for books to be rediscovered, we actively search for them. This approach, I want to recall, is known as Quo-Vadis research, a very fitting term coined by Julie Marte-Cohn and Felicitas Heimann-Jelinek. Quo-Vadis research focuses on where an object has gone rather than just where it came from. However, what makes the Library of Lost Books unique is that we don't just research these lost books, we invite the public to help find them. But before we talk about how we do that, let's take a closer look at the books themselves. What was the Hochschule, what happened to its library, and why did we choose this case? The Hochschule für die Wissenschaft des Judentums was one of the most important institutions of Jewish studies in Germany. Founded in Berlin in 1872, it was home to thinkers like Abraham Geiger and Ismael Bogen. Its library, with over 60,000 volumes, was a cornerstone of Jewish studies and theological education. In 1942, the library was seized by the Reichssecurity Main Office and used for anti-Semitic research. What remained was later recovered by the Allies, not just in Berlin, but in Theresienstadt Ghetto and other Nazi depots nearby. We chose this case not only because of the Hochschule's historical importance, but because its fate mirrors that of many Jewish institutional libraries. The books were first looted by the Nazis. After the war, what remained was salvaged by the Allied forces. But since the original institution no longer existed and there was no legal successor, the books could not be returned and were instead redistributed. In the decades that followed, their origins were gradually forgotten. By tracing them, we are not just reconstructing one collection's history, we hope to shed light on a larger pattern of loss and dispersal. So how do we search for these books, and how do we involve the public in this process? Let's take a look at the key components of the project. The website, which comprises both an online exhibition and a database, serves as an educational platform and a crowdsourcing tool. Users can search identified books, submit potential finds, and explore the history of the Hochschule library. Search days are workshops organized with libraries, archives, museums, and schools, where participants learn provenance research skills and actively search for missing books. Some institutions we worked with are here today. Thank you again, we couldn't have done this without you. Outreach has been a central component of the project, especially because of its citizen science approach. Our social media presence plays a key role in this effort. Through our Instagram account, we share historical content, invite followers to ask questions, and encourage them to get involved as volunteer book detectives. In addition to our digital outreach, we presented the project in a series of physical installations and events across Europe and Israel. We have showcased the project in Berlin, Prague, London, Jerusalem, Frankfurt, and Heidelberg. In fact, the grand opening took place right here in the State Library in Berlin in November 23. Many thanks again to the State Library for hosting the launch and organizing 3 search days with us. So far, this approach has worked. Books have been found and people have engaged in ways we didn't expect. At the same time, this process has revealed challenges. What have we learned from combining citizen science and provenance research? Opening provenance research to the public is a new approach. The results show its potential in 2 key ways. More than 4,500 books have been found in Germany, Czech Republic, UK, US, and Israel, proving that public participation can lead to real discoveries. Second, nearly 45,000 people have visited the online exhibition, and over 20,000 follow the project on Instagram. The response has been overwhelmingly positive, not just in numbers, but in how people interact with the project. For example, our followers on Instagram engage actively, asking research questions, sharing finds, and sharing stories, and helping to spread awareness of looted books. These successes show that involving the public in provenance research works, but it also comes with challenges. Expanding provenance research beyond institutional settings proved productive, but also brought with it several challenges. The first was data verification and follow-up work. Opening up the reporting process to the public led to a wide range of submissions. While many were helpful, others were less relevant. For example, some participants reported every book they found with a Jewish cultural reconstruction bookplate in it, even when there was no connection to the Hochschule library. As a result, submissions had to be reviewed carefully, and many required follow-up to clarify details. To support this process, we introduced a reporting form to help standardize submissions. While it added structure, it didn't eliminate the need for follow-up. Some users still submitted incomplete information, and others found the form too detailed or difficult to use, which may have discouraged participation in some cases. These experiences suggest that future reporting processes should be easier to navigate. At the same time, it's important to plan for the follow-up works that will likely remain necessary when working with public contributions. The second challenge we encountered was a certain degree of institutional hesitation. Some libraries were cautious about hosting search days, mainly due to two concerns. First, there was uncertainty about the potential outcomes. What if our volunteer book detectives identified items with problematic provenances in their collections? Second, there were reservations about allowing students and younger participants to handle historical materials, with questions about whether the books would be treated with sufficient care. In practice, however, we found that participants handled the materials with great care and attention. In fact, engaging directly with historical books seemed to encourage a strong sense of responsibility and respect for the collections. The third challenge was language barriers. Most of the books and provenance marks we are searching for are in German. However, because the collection was dispersed over the past 80 years, these books are now held in libraries around the world. As a result, many search day participants did not speak German, which made it more difficult for them to identify provenance markings or understand inscriptions. This is a reality we have to navigate. If books cross borders, so must research. To address this challenge, we provided educational materials in 4 different languages and offered historical context to help participants make sense of their finds. We also used tools like Google Lens to quickly translate provenance markings from photos. This approach proved helpful and could be expanded further in future projects. Despite these challenges, the project has already made an impact. The immediate impact of the project is clear. Students have engaged actively, institutions have taken notice, and the conversation around looted books has expanded. But the most significant impact may not be on students, it may be on librarians. Many of those who hosted search days became deeply involved, not only in revisiting the histories of their collections, but also in exploring new ways to connect with library users. The project offered an opportunity to engage with young people, a group that can be difficult to reach in traditional library settings. In some cases, the enthusiasm sparked during search days led to the development of new workshop formats, turning a one-time event into a longer-term exploration of provenance. This is where we see the potential for lasting change. In the long run, with librarians acting as multipliers, we hope to see provenance awareness everywhere, not just among specialists, but among the general public. That shift won't happen overnight, but projects like this one help lay the foundation. Unfortunately, legal restitution is not an option for most looted books. Many belong to so-called heirless collections, or their original owners can no longer be identified. But that doesn't mean they should remain unnoticed in library collections. If we can't return them, we can still acknowledge them. The Library of Lost Books shows that recognition is possible, even when formal restitution isn't. Identifying these books, documenting their history, and sharing that knowledge is one way to ensure they are not treated as ordinary holdings. At the same time, these cases offer something else, an opportunity to involve others. By opening up provenance research to a wider audience, we create space for people to engage with the past in a practical and accessible way. It becomes a shared effort, not just a specialist task. This project does not replace traditional provenance research, it expands it. By making provenance work more visible and participatory, we can bring more people into the process of confronting the past. With that in mind, I invite you to consider the following questions. How can we open up our work in meaningful ways? Can libraries and archives involve users in researching their collections? Could elements of this model even be adapted for other looted artifacts? The search is far from over, but the more awareness we raise, the better the chances that these books and other displaced cultural objects will be recognized for what they are. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. I really like the description of provenance researchers in the video as having razor-sharp minds and maybe a funny head. Perhaps we can all confirm. Who wants to make a remark on this presentation? Yes, please, Mr. Fuhrmeister.
Thank you very much. I would like to know more about the infrastructural setup. So this was a project, or was it not? That was not clear to me. My comparison would be Bad Arolsen Archives. They have 20,000, not Instagram followers, but people transcribing records. And they have a staff of 15 people full-time administering the 20,000 that contribute. So this is, let's say, the larger framework to assess the possibilities of that approach. I would like to know more in order to have a better understanding of the options you propose.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, the Arolsen Archives, they are a big inspiration for us. The Stolen Memory Project was the inspiration that actually got us started with the Library of Lost Books project. And just like the colleagues at the Arolsen Archives, we also only in the process noticed how much follow-up work is required by these great projects. The Arolsen Archives managed to find a way to continue working and even expand the work on this wonderful project, while we are in the situation that our funds are limited, and so also the project duration is limited, at least as of now.
So then, all the best for your project for the future, and thank you very much. Coming to the end of this conference day, I think we have had a lot of interesting presentations that have given us a glimpse into the research that our European neighbors conducted in order to unravel the chaos, the destruction and murder that Nazi Germany and its allies had brought to them. Today's presentations have covered a vast, however depressing horizon, starting with early restitutions of cultural property taken from expelled, deported, and murdered Jews in Hungary, Lower Silesia, and Czechoslovakia. We then heard case studies that shed light on the war-related evacuation and return of collections in Poland and France, as well as of a German museum that later found itself in the American occupation zone. The undertaking of establishing a so-called enemy library, robbing precious books from seemingly everywhere, underlines the insanity of National Socialist ideology and loot. Today's final panel addressed the manifold attempts to get a modest amount of order into the chaos that the Second World War had left. Attempts of returns and compensation included the work of the Offenbach Archival Depot and handing over cultural assets whose owners had been murdered or couldn't be retrieved to the Jewish successor organizations. We looked at controversial purchases on the art market in occupied France, and finally, the Library of Lost Books provided a silver lining, as it showed that the restitution of Nazi-looted cultural assets is not only a scholarly enterprise, but has a base in civic life as well, and hopefully a growing one. I want to close this day by thanking everyone who contributed as speaker, and I want to thank the audience as well for staying with us and for being so interactive today. We are looking forward to welcoming you again tomorrow. We will start with the program at 10:30. Now I wish you all a good evening and enjoy your stay for everyone who is visiting, and see you tomorrow.